Picture running through the streets of your childhood neighborhood, only to be confronted by a man with a gun claiming you don't belong. That's exactly what unfolded when an overzealous HOA enforcer targeted the wrong resident. The tale I'm about to share could have ended with police lights flashing, yellow tape cordoning off a quiet street, and a family grieving the loss of their son. But it didn't, thanks to one man, calm, trained, and composed, who kept his cool when another lost control. Kendrick Vale was no stranger to high-stakes situations. At 29, with years in the Special Forces, he'd faced combat and carried burdens that would overwhelm most. Returning to Texas to visit his parents in a San Antonio suburb, he wasn't dwelling on his past. He was simply happy to be home, savoring his mother's cooking, his father's hearty laughter, and a break from the relentless alertness that defined his life for nearly a decade. The neighborhood hadn't changed much since he left: neat lawns, kids on bikes, neighbors offering friendly waves while unloading groceries. It was the kind of place people chose for its safety, or so it seemed. But safety depends on those who think they control it, and in this community, one man believed he held the reins. Clifford Harlan, in his mid-50s, stocky and loud, had appointed himself the neighborhood's guardian. Unelected and unappointed, he'd become the self-styled enforcer of the homeowners association. If a car was parked slightly askew, Clifford left a note. If kids played too late, he'd bark at them to go inside. Recently, he decided his authority needed more weight, so he began carrying a pistol, strapped openly on his hip like a sheriff's badge, as if he'd earned a role he never deserved. Kendrick had heard about Clifford during calls with his mother while stationed abroad. Back then, it sounded like harmless small-town gossip. Every neighborhood has its overzealous watchdog, right? He hadn't given it much thought, never imagining Clifford Harlan would challenge his composure more than any combat zone. That evening, after a family dinner, Kendrick decided to go for a run. He slipped on a jacket, tied his sneakers, and headed out into the warm Texas dusk, the sky glowing a deep amber. He wasn't armed or moving with tactical precision, just a man jogging through his childhood streets. But to Clifford, a young black man running at twilight didn't look like a neighbor. He saw a threat. Without hesitation, Clifford reached for his gun. Kendrick was lost in thought, the rhythm of his steps blending with the evening sounds, porch lights flickering on, a dog barking in the distance. He was planning to call an old army buddy later when he noticed movement ahead. Clifford stepped out from behind parked cars, his hand hovering near his weapon, eyes fixed. "Hey!" Clifford's voice boomed across the street. "What are you doing here?" Kendrick slowed, caught off guard by the hostility. He was used to neighbors nodding or waving, but this was different. Clifford's hand edged closer to his pistol, and Kendrick's instincts sharpened. Years of training kicked in, alerting him to a man eager for a confrontation. "I live here," Kendrick said, his voice steady and measured. "Just out for a run." Clifford scoffed, unconvinced. "Don't lie to me. This is a private community. Who are you really?" Kendrick stopped running, keeping his hands visible. His military experience taught him one thing: in tense moments, control the tempo, control the outcome. He refused to mirror Clifford's aggression. That path led to chaos. Clifford, though, pressed forward, shoulders squared, radiating a sense of authority he thought he owned. Kendrick felt the tension rising, second by second. His parents' house was just a few blocks away, yet this sidewalk felt like a war zone. The night was about to take a darker turn, sharper than anyone expected. Clifford's words lingered in the air, the silence cutting deeper than the cricket's hum. Kendrick stood firm, his breathing steady from the jog, eyes locked on the men blocking his path. The streetlight glinted off the pistol on Clifford's hip, too visible, too ready. "Sir," Kendrick said, his tone calm but resolute, "I told you, I live here. My parents are on Birchfield Drive. I'm just running." Clifford wasn't hearing it. His gaze scanned Kendrick like he was an intruder who didn't belong in his carefully guarded world. "You don't look like you live here," Clifford snapped, his hand twitching toward the gun as if it fueled his confidence. "Name and address. Now." Kendrick took a slow breath. This wasn't a battlefield overseas where a wrong move could be fatal. This was his hometown, where he should have felt safe. Yet here he was, treated like a criminal for jogging after dinner. He pointed down the street. 3 blocks that way. Brown brick house, silver truck in the driveway. My parents' place. You can ask them. Clifford's lip curled, unmoved. That's not how this works. You think I'm naive? People like you always have excuses. Kendrick's jaw tightened, but he kept his posture relaxed. His instincts screamed, he could close the gap in seconds, disarm Clifford before he reacted, but that wasn't the goal. The goal was to get home without this street becoming a crime scene. Across the street, a porch light flicked on. Mrs. Denning, an elderly neighbor Kendrick remembered from childhood, stepped out with her terrier pulling at its leash. She froze, spotting Clifford confronting Kendrick, gun within reach. "Cliff, what's going on?" she called, her voice unsteady. Clifford ignored her, eyes fixed on Kendrick. "Ma'am, I'm just trying to get home," Kendrick said, loud enough for her to hear. "I grew up here. My parents live down the road." Mrs. Denning's brow furrowed as she recognized Kendrick. "Cliff, that's the Vale boy. He's been in the military. Put that thing away." For a moment, Kendrick thought the situation might defuse, but Clifford shifted, annoyed at being challenged. "Ma'am, go inside," he barked. "I've got this handled." "Handled?" Mrs. Denning retorted, clutching her dog. "You're threatening a neighbor." The terrier yipped, the sound bouncing off the houses. Kendrick's pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the growing audience. Blinds twitched in windows, shadows moved behind curtains. Clifford wanted control, but the street was watching. Kendrick spoke again, voice low. "You don't want this, sir." "I'm no threat. I'm telling the truth." Clifford's lip twitched. "I decide what's a threat here." Kendrick almost laughed, not from amusement but disbelief. This man had built a fantasy where he was the law, and he was ready to risk everything to keep it alive. "Sir," Kendrick said carefully, "if you draw that gun, you're making a mistake you can't undo." Another voice broke in, sharp and tense. "Cliff, stop it." George Randall, from 2 houses down, stood on his porch, phone glowing as he recorded. "I'm calling the police. Put the gun down before you ruin everything." Kendrick's eyes flicked to the phone, then back to Clifford. The air grew heavier, charged with the knowledge that this wasn't private anymore. Clifford couldn't bluff his way out. But cornered men are unpredictable, and Kendrick knew pride mixed with fear could erase reason. He took a slow step forward, palms open. "Listen, you're upset, I understand. But you're not a cop. You don't have authority here. You're pointing a gun at a neighbor trying to go home. Let's both walk away tonight. That's the smart move." Clifford hesitated, his hand hovering near the pistol, eyes darting between Kendrick, George's phone, and Mrs. Denning's glare. The audience was growing, and he wasn't used to being questioned. But hesitation isn't surrender, and Clifford's pride was about to push the standoff further. The silence on Birchfield Drive pulsed, as if the street itself held its breath. Clifford's hand twitched near his gun, his chest heaving faster. Kendrick saw the signs: nervous energy, wounded pride, the refusal to back down in front of onlookers. "Don't move," Clifford barked, his voice breaking. Kendrick froze, his training screaming that this was a volatile mix, an armed, anxious man desperate to feel powerful. One wrong word could ignite everything. "I said I live here," Kendrick repeated, firmer now. "My parents are Albert and Lorraine Vale. Ask anyone here." Clifford's face twisted, as if the idea that neighbors might vouch for Kendrick was unthinkable. "I don't care about your names," he snapped. "You're out here at night. You think I don't notice? Not on my watch." Kendrick tilted his head. "Your watch? You mean the HOA?" Clifford stiffened. "Exactly. Someone's got to keep order here." Kendrick bit back a bitter laugh. He'd seen real rules of engagement in war zones. This was a man inventing his own with a handgun. George's voice cut through again, louder. "Cliff, you're out of control. Everyone sees it. Put the gun away before the cops arrive." The word "cops" made Clifford flinch, but he didn't back down. He turned slightly toward George. "Stay out of this," he snapped, the gun swinging briefly before locking back on Kendrick. That moment of sloppiness confirmed Kendrick's read: Clifford had no control over his weapon, making him even more dangerous. Kendrick stayed still, eyes steady. George's words were true, but they risked cornering Clifford further. A humiliated man was a ticking bomb. Mrs. Denning stepped closer, her terrier clutched tightly. "Cliff, stop this. That's Albert and Lorraine's son. He mowed my lawn as a kid." For a moment, Clifford's arm wavered, the gun dipping slightly. Kendrick seized the chance. "See. They know me. I'm no stranger. I'm just heading home." Clifford's eyes darted, his breathing ragged. "You think I'm a fool," he snarled. "People lie all the time. How do I know you're not carrying something right now?" Kendrick held his gaze, letting the question hang. "You don't," he said evenly. "That's the issue, isn't it? You're aiming a gun at someone without knowing the truth, and you're about to make a mistake that'll haunt you." The words weren't loud, but they carried the weight of experience Clifford couldn't fathom. Clifford shifted, trying to stand taller. "Don't lecture me. You don't warn me." Kendrick's voice dropped, calm but piercing. "You've already lost control. Look around, half this street is watching. That phone's recording every move. Keep your hand on that gun, and you're digging a hole you can't escape." For a heartbeat, neither moved. Clifford's chest heaved, his fingers flexing. Kendrick stayed steady, the opposite of the chaos in front of him. Then, like a spark in dry grass, Clifford snapped. He yanked the pistol free, the metallic click echoing through the night. Gasps erupted from porches. "Drop it, Cliff!" George shouted, his phone shaking. "You're on video." Kendrick didn't flinch. His voice cut through, steady and cold. "Point that at me, and you're gambling with your life. I've faced worse than this. You've got one chance to walk away." Clifford's eyes blazed, but his grip trembled, a sign he wasn't ready for real violence, just playing at it. But men playing with guns are the most dangerous kind. Neighbors' voices rose, some pleading, others shouting for police. Kendrick stayed focused. "Clifford," he said evenly, "you're not the law. You're not a judge. You're a neighbor, same as me. Right now, you're about to ruin your life over ego. Is it worth it?" The silence stretched, heavy and tense. Clifford's gun wavered, his hand shaking. Kendrick's heart beat steady, not from fear but from the sharp awareness of how close this was to disaster. The gun was out now, and there was no turning back. The confrontation hit its peak, the night electric with tension. Clifford held the pistol, its barrel aimed at Kendrick's chest, trembling visibly. Neighbors whispered, phones recording, some dialing 911. Kendrick stood motionless, his breathing controlled, hands open. His training had taught him to stay calm in chaos. One wrong move could trigger Clifford's panic, and a panicked man with a gun was as deadly as any enemy. "Don't test me!" Clifford shouted, his face flushed, sweat gleaming. "I said stay put." "I'm not moving," Kendrick replied, voice even. "You're making this worse." George called out, his phone steady now. "Cliff, you're done. Everyone's watching. You point that gun, you're not coming back from this." Clifford's pride was unraveling, but he swung the gun toward George for a split second before snapping it back to Kendrick. That lack of discipline made Kendrick's instincts sharpen. Clifford wasn't in control of the weapon, multiplying the danger. "You're pointing a loaded gun at a man who's done nothing," Kendrick said, his voice like steel. "Think about how this looks. Think about where it ends." Clifford sneered. "It ends with me protecting my community." "Protecting?" Kendrick asked, eyes narrowing. "From what?" "A man running. You're the threat here." The words hit hard. Clifford's shoulders jerked, his grip tightening. Mrs. Denning cried out, "Cliff, stop. You'll kill him." Kendrick shifted his weight slightly, ready to act if needed, but knowing any move carried risks. "Sir," he said, steady as ever, "I've been in situations like this. If you pull that trigger, you'll regret it forever. You don't want that on your conscience." Clifford's breathing grew erratic, the gun shaking more. His eyes darted to the growing crowd, to George's phone, to the shadows watching. Doubt flickered in his expression. "You think you're better than me," he muttered. "Because you were in the army, you think you can talk down to me." Kendrick seized the moment, his voice softer but sharp. "No. Because I was in the army, I know how fast this can spiral. You don't want to learn that lesson the hard way." George shouted, "Cops are coming." "Drop it, Cliff." The mention of police made Clifford flinch, his hand shaking harder. Kendrick spoke again, almost privately. You've got a choice. Put the gun down and go home, or end up in cuffs, or worse. That's where this is headed. For a moment, Clifford's arm sagged, the gun dipping. Neighbors exhaled. But then his eyes hardened, and he raised the weapon again. Nobody tells me what to do, he roared, the pistol wobbling. Kendrick's voice was final. If you're going to aim that at me, be ready to use it. Because once it's out, there's no pretending. The words landed heavy. Clifford froze, the gun trembling, his face pale. Sirens wailed closer, changing everything. The sirens grew louder, slicing through the night. For some, they promised relief, for Clifford, they were a spark to his desperation. His eyes widened, flicking toward the street corner, then back to Kendrick. The gun wavered, his breathing frantic. They're coming, George called, almost triumphant. You're done, Cliff. Drop it before they haul you away. Clifford snarled, shut up, George. You've always hated me. He stepped closer to Kendrick, the pistol shaking higher. Don't move, he growled, though Kendrick hadn't budged. The street was now a stage, porch lights blazing, doors open, whispers spreading. Clifford was unraveling before an audience. Mr. Alvarez, a retired teacher, called from his lawn, his wife clutching his arm. Cliff, you've gone too far. That's Albert and Lorraine's son. He served our country. You're making a fool of yourself. Clifford's head whipped toward Alvarez. Stay out of it, he shouted, the gun swinging briefly before locking back on Kendrick. That sloppiness tightened Kendrick's focus. He'd seen this before, men who thought they held power but were seconds from disaster. Look at me, Clifford, Kendrick said, voice commanding. Just me. It worked. Clifford's eyes locked on him, teeth gritted, the gun still shaking. Sirens are close, Kendrick continued. When the cops see you with that gun, what do you think happens? Clifford swallowed hard. They'll understand, he muttered. I was protecting my neighborhood. No, Kendrick said sharply. They'll see a man threatening a veteran in front of witnesses. They'll take you down before you can explain. Mrs. Denning added, Cliff, think of your family. Don't do this to them. Her words hit, and Clifford's hand dipped slightly. Neighbors gasped, sensing a shift. But pride held him firm. He straightened, voice cracking. Nobody runs me. Not the HOA, not the cops. Kendrick's patience thinned, but his control held. You don't get it. You think you're standing tall, but you're falling apart. Everyone sees it. You're not protecting, you're terrifying the people you claim to guard. Clifford's jaw clenched, the gun tightening in his grip. Sirens roared closer, red and blue lights flashing on the houses. Neighbors shifted, some retreating, others frozen. George shouted, Cliff, last chance. Drop it. Clifford muttered, they'll believe me. I'm the one keeping this place safe. Kendrick took a breath. They won't. They'll believe the cameras, the witnesses, the truth. And the truth is, you're aiming a gun at a neighbor who's done nothing. For a moment, Clifford's hand shook so hard the gun nearly slipped. But pride, fear, and the growing lights pushed him to the edge. Tires crunched gravel, a squad car screeched to a halt, lights blazing. 2 officers leapt out, weapons drawn. Drop the gun, one barked. Now. Every neighbor froze, waiting for Clifford's choice. Kendrick spoke one last time, voice steady. Clifford, this is it. Put it down. Don't make this worse. But Clifford's pride wasn't ready to surrender, and the standoff hit its breaking point. The squad car's lights bathed the street in red and blue, flashing across every face. Clifford stood at the center, gun raised, sweat dripping, chest heaving. The officers' guns were trained on him, their commands sharp. Drop the weapon. Now. Clifford looked trapped, caught between his fantasy of control and the reality closing in. His hand shook, the gun still aimed at Kendrick, as if lowering it meant losing everything. Kendrick stayed still, every muscle ready, his training keeping him calm. He remembered Afghanistan, a tense standoff outside a village, where patience had saved lives. Clifford wasn't a soldier, just a neighbor with an ego and a gun he barely controlled. Clifford, Kendrick said, voice low but piercing, you're not in charge anymore. You never were. But you can still walk away alive. Shut up. Clifford snapped, the gun jerking. The officers tensed, fingers on triggers. Drop it, they shouted. Kendrick pressed on. They won't hesitate, Clifford. You pull that trigger, they'll end you right here, in front of everyone. That's what's coming. Clifford's eyes darted, panic replacing bravado. He glanced at the crowd, George's phone, Mrs. Denning's glare, Mr. Alvarez's disapproval. You don't get it, Clifford muttered, almost pleading. I was protecting. You're not protecting, Kendrick cut in. You're scaring your neighbors. Look at them. Clifford's eyes flickered to the crowd, faces full of fear, cameras rolling. The realization hit hard. Final warning, an officer bellowed. Kendrick softened his tone. You've got kids, right? You want them to see their dad die on this street. On video forever. Clifford's lip trembled, his face pale. The gun sagged, neighbors gasping. You say you're protecting, Kendrick said. Prove it. Protect them from watching a man die. Protect your family from losing you. Clifford's hand shook violently, knuckles white. The gun dipped lower, then lower still. Finally, it slipped from his grasp, clattering to the pavement. Neighbors exhaled, officers surged forward, and Clifford dropped to his knees, hands to his head as police rushed in. The cuffs clicked, his pride crushed under the weight of his actions. Kendrick stood still, breathing steady, watching the scene close. His discipline had saved not just his life, but Clifford's too. But the story wasn't over, the aftermath would ripple through the neighborhood in ways no one saw coming. The sound of the pistol hitting the asphalt should have ended it, but Clifford's pride wasn't done. As officers closed in, shouting, on the ground. Hands behind your head. Clifford twisted, snarling, I'm not a criminal. He thrashed as an officer pinned him, another securing his wrists. I was protecting my neighborhood, he shouted, face red, spit flying. Neighbors flinched, but Kendrick stayed still. A cornered man could still be dangerous. Stop resisting, an officer growled as Clifford swung an elbow, forcing them to wrestle him down. His eyes locked on Kendrick, burning with resentment. You think you're better than me, he spat. You think you can humiliate me? Kendrick didn't respond. His silence was louder than words, cutting through Clifford's rage. Say something. Clifford roared, writhing. You don't belong here. You never did. The words stung, raw and ugly, heard by everyone, neighbors, officers, the street itself. Kendrick spoke, voice soft but heavy. I've fought for this country, lost friends for it. I belong here more than you'll ever know. The words hit like a blade. Clifford sagged, not from surrender but from the collapse of his illusions. Officers cuffed him, pinning him to the ground as he muttered, This is my neighborhood. You'll all regret this. No one believed him anymore. An officer read his rights, another bagged the gun. Clifford's glare burned, but his threats were empty. You'll see, he whispered as they hauled him to the squad car. You'll see what happens when you push a man too far. Kendrick stayed silent, his restraint was his power, the opposite of Clifford's chaos. As the officers shoved Clifford into the cruiser, neighbors spilled from their porches, murmuring shock, anger, disbelief. Never thought it'd come to this, one man said. What if Kendrick wasn't trained, a woman whispered. Kendrick heard, the words heavier than Clifford's venom. If he hadn't stayed calm, blood could have stained the street. He exhaled, adrenaline fading. His parents' house was close, but his mother had likely heard the sirens, fearing he wouldn't come home. The cruiser's door slammed, muffling Clifford's final shouts. His reign as the neighborhood's self-appointed enforcer ended, not with fanfare but with a heavy silence across Birchfield Drive. Neighbors looked at Kendrick, gratitude mixed with guilt. Gratitude for his calm, guilt for letting Clifford become a monster unchecked. But even as the car drove off, one question lingered, what damage was already done, and what would follow? The squad car rolled away, lights flashing but sirens off. Neighbors watched in stunned silence as Clifford vanished around the corner, cuffed and ranting. The street exhaled, but the air was thick with unease, as if everyone sensed this was only the beginning. 2 officers stayed, one taking notes, the other scanning the crowd. Neighbors clustered, Mrs. Denning clutching her dog, George gripping his phone, Mr. Alvarez speaking softly to his wife. Kendrick stood where the standoff had peaked, adrenaline draining, muscles heavy. He rubbed his neck, sweat cooling on his skin. "Sir," an officer approached, voice cautious but kind, "you okay? Did he threaten you before we got here?" Kendrick shook his head. "Just what you saw. Came at me while I was running, demanded to know why I was here, pulled the gun." The officer nodded, jotting notes. "Neighbors back your story. It's all on video too." He glanced at George, who raised his phone. "You'll have my copy," George said, voice tight. "Clifford's been acting like he owns this place for years. Tonight, he crossed the line." Mrs. Denning spoke up, trembling. "We let this happen. We saw how he was, the notes, the yelling at kids. We called it harmless. But tonight," she looked at Kendrick. "We could have lost you." Kendrick met her gaze, silent. He didn't want thanks or pity, just the truth. This wasn't an accident, it was the result of pride, entitlement, and a gun. The officer closed his notepad. "We'll charge him, brandishing, assault with a deadly weapon, resisting. The DA will handle the rest. He's off the street for now." "Good," Mr. Alvarez muttered, his wife vowing their grandkids wouldn't walk alone here again. Kendrick spoke, voice firm. "Clifford didn't become this overnight. He was allowed to act like a cop. You gave him that power. He didn't just decide to pull a gun, he grew into it because no one stopped him." The street fell quiet. No one argued, they knew he was right. Headlights appeared, his parents' truck. Lorraine leapt out, rushing to Kendrick, hands shaking as she checked him for injuries. "Are you okay?" she cried. Kendrick hugged her. "I'm fine, Mom." Albert glared at the crowd, then at his son. "What happened?" "Clifford," George answered. "Pulled a gun on your boy. It's all on video." Albert's fists clenched. "He could have killed my son." Lorraine gripped Kendrick tighter. "Thank God you stayed calm." Kendrick nodded. "That's why I'm here." Neighbors lingered, buzzing with shock, replaying the night. Their glances at Kendrick held gratitude and shame, gratitude for averting tragedy, shame for letting it escalate. The officers promised extra patrols and left. Silence settled, but it wasn't the safe quiet of before, it was heavy, forcing reflection. Kendrick guided his mother toward their house, his father bristling beside them. Behind them, neighbors whispered, humiliation, danger, lucky, shame. As the door closed, Kendrick knew this wasn't over. The real test would come tomorrow, when the neighborhood faced its own reflection. Morning broke over Birchfield Drive, sunlight glinting off cars, sprinklers humming. But the light didn't erase the previous night, it made it sharper. Neighbors whispered at mailboxes, retirees walked dogs slowly, pausing where Clifford's gun had fallen. Some avoided eyes, others spoke openly. At the Vale house, Kendrick sipped coffee at the kitchen table while Lorraine hovered, sleepless, replaying the terror. Albert paced by the window. "They're all talking," he said, anger lacing his voice. Saw Gerald whispering, Denning too. Like they can't believe it. But they knew Clifford was trouble, they let him run wild. Lorraine looked at Kendrick, eyes tired. "I'm just glad you're alive. That's all that matters." Kendrick set his mug down. "It's not just about me, Mom. It's this place. Everyone let Clifford play enforcer. Nobody stopped him until he had a gun on me." The doorbell rang. George stood there, phone in hand. "Mind if I come in?" Albert waved him inside. George set the phone down, showing the video. "Police have their copy. Thought you should see it, Kendrick." The footage played, Clifford shouting, gun drawn, Kendrick calm, hands open. Watching felt surreal, like seeing himself in someone else's story. George's voice was tight. "This is spreading online. Neighbors shared it in group chats. It'll go wider soon. People will have opinions." Albert frowned. "Opinions? Clifford pulled a gun on my son." George nodded. "Some will say he snapped, some will call it self-defense, and some will make it uglier." Lorraine clutched her towel. "Uglier?" George hesitated. Heard Marla Simmons saying Kendrick must have provoked him. Like a gun just comes out for no reason. Albert slammed the counter. Provoked. He was jogging. Kendrick raised a hand. Let them talk. The truth doesn't change. George leaned forward. HOA's meeting tonight. Some want to act like Clifford was a lone problem, nothing to do with them. Others are mad, saying they warned about him. It's splitting people. Kendrick exhaled. That's what happens when you ignore a problem until it blows up. Everyone picks sides after. George nodded grimly, then left. Lorraine touched Kendrick's hand. This isn't fair. You shouldn't have faced this here. Kendrick squeezed her hand. Life's not fair, Mom. It's what we do with it that counts. Mrs. Denning walked her dog, pausing to wave at Kendrick through the window, an apology more than a greeting. Teens biked past, staring at the confrontation spot, one muttering, "That's where it happened." Clifford was in a cell, but his shadow lingered. That evening, cars lined up for the HOA meeting. Inside, tempers flared. "We told you Clifford was trouble," one shouted. "Don't act like you didn't laugh at his patrols," another snapped. Kendrick sat at the back, arms folded, listening. He wasn't there to accuse or shame, just to hear if anyone would admit they'd let this grow. The meeting stretched late, voices clashing, anger, shame, denial. The community, once proud of its safety, was fractured, forced to face its flaws under harsh lights. Mrs. Denning stood, dog in arms. We all knew Clifford was too much. We rolled our eyes, whispered, but did nothing. That's on us. Murmurs spread, some nodding, others squirming. Mr. Alvarez added, "We let him think he had power. We fed his ego, and now look." The HOA head, Janet Morse, spoke nervously. "Clifford's gone, but the culture that let him act like that isn't. We need to decide what kind of community we'll be." Eyes turned to Kendrick. He stood, chair scraping. "I'm not here to argue," he said, voice steady. "Last night could have ended with blood, mine, Clifford's, and officers. It almost did because nobody dealt with a man who thought he was in charge. I learned in war that restraint is strength, discipline is power. Clifford had neither. He thought a gun made him strong, but power without control is just danger." The room fell silent. You have to ask, what did you ignore? What did you excuse? Silence isn't neutral. It builds men like Clifford. Next time, you might not be lucky enough to have someone stay calm. Lorraine's eyes glistened, Albert's jaw tight with pride. Neighbors nodded or looked away. Mrs. Denning whispered, "He's right." Kendrick stepped back, leaving before the meeting ended. The night air was cool, the street quiet but changed. At home, Lorraine hugged him. "You said what needed saying." Kendrick sat on the porch, staring at the street where Clifford's pride nearly turned deadly. He'd fought for safety abroad, only to face danger here. Some threats don't come from outside, they grow when people look away. The bravest act isn't always action, sometimes it's staying steady, refusing to let chaos win. Kendrick thought of Clifford's words, "You don't belong." He shook his head. Belonging wasn't about who shouted loudest or carried a gun. It was about what you stood for when it mattered. As night deepened, he went inside, closing the door. Tomorrow, the neighborhood would still be cracked, but maybe they'd start mending. The lesson was clear: pride isn't power, and silence isn't safety. If this story moved you, reflect on your own community. What do you overlook? What voices go unchecked? Sometimes, the line between tragedy and survival is courage to act or discipline to stay calm. If this resonated, share it.